let me say, so this is what I intend to do in this short presentation, say a few things about innovation and technology, really try to define, even though it's a bit difficult, what the fourth industrial revolution is, then think about possible scenarios for the fourth industrial revolution, including, you will see, utopia, dystopia, and then other ones as well. And then a few remarks, I will end with a few remarks on the fourth industrial revolution and business. But to start with, a few reflections on technology and society, really. I think today there is a strong pressure for people about technology. So you can see it with this picture. There's a strong social pressure. You have to know about new technologies, otherwise, basically, it seems that you are outdated, that you don't really understand how society works. So for instance, most people are on Facebook. Now it would be a very, very strange thing not to be on Facebook. And it involves a number of socio-political problems. It's just an example. People fear that if they don't understand technologies, it's a major problem. So that's one thing. But as well, you have other ways to look at technology that exist. Some other people, in particular in academia, are a bit more skeptical about technology. This is what I wanted to show with this picture. So I don't know if you know the kitchen test from Krugman. It's quite a famous thing. So let me explain to you. So Krugman and other economists are quite skeptical about IT and how IT changed the world. Because some people say that this is a revolution, so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, I'm going to make the same arguments about the Industrial Revolution. But according to Krugman, if you look at the kitchen now, look at a kitchen in the 1950s, middle-class kitchen, and look at the kitchen in 1912 or 1910. Well, you will see, I can tell you that the difference is much bigger between 1910 and 1950 than between 1950 and now. Think about a washing machine, for instance. Okay? The washing machine would already exist in 1950. Okay? Now we have the same, perhaps it can be connected to the internet, but it's still a washing machine. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is science. I'm not going to talk about science anyway. I'm a sociologist and more interested in philosophy as well. But if we talk about science, the last major innovations were in the 1920s, in particular with quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity in particular. But since then, nothing really major happened. Anyway, these were just, remarks before starting. And I will start with the video from YouTube from one of the big names about the fourth industrial revolution.
The fourth industrial revolution will impact our lives completely. It will not only change how we communicate, how we produce, how we consume. It will change actually us, our own identity, and of course gives life to such policies and developments like smart traffic, smart government, smart cities. What we will see is that everything will be integrated into an ecosystem driven by big data and driven particularly by close cooperation also of governments with business, civil society. And this revolution will come at a breathtaking speed. It will be like a tsunami. And actually, it's not just a digital revolution. It's digital, of course, physical with nanotechnology, but it's also biological. And so three dimension provides a particular force to this revolution. So what the World Economic Forum is doing is to promote this public-private cooperation to master the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution will have multifold impacts. Of course, every industry will be digitalized, will be disintermediated, and has to define a new business model. But it's not only business which is affected, it's government which has to move over to agile government, it is society as a whole, with the danger of job losses, but also with the need to reskill and upskill people fast. So there's an impact on society. So we will have to prepare very well for this revolution, and I feel that the Asian countries with a relatively young population can manage and master this revolution easier compared to other countries in the world. What is particularly important is the educational system. We have to change the educational system, which is still very much anchored even in the 19th century. We have to adapt it to the need to change continuously, for example, jobs. So the new educational system has not only be aiming at developing digital capabilities, and I should add ethical norms, that it also has to be based on a lifelong educational system.
Okay, thanks a lot. So again, a quote from Schwab to try to define what the fourth industrial revolution is. He's one of the most influential thinkers about the fourth industrial revolution. He wrote a book about it. He's very influential. So he mentioned a variety of things, and I will obviously make remarks and points about them. Well, on some of them, but not all of them, just to show that it's a very complex issue. And anyway, it's just the start of this. Here, in this long quote, I think we have two things, really. First of all, we have a narrative about what industrial revolutions are, and you have a kind of linear narrative, so to speak. Okay, so you have the first industrial revolution, you have a second one, you have a third one, and then you have a fourth one. So the idea that there is a kind of idea that you have a history that you can understand and that you have progress. Okay, you move from point A to point B to point C. Okay, and this is connected to technical progress and implicitly as well to moral and social progress. So this is a narrative that exists in this literature, and it's important to think about it. That's the first thing. The second thing is about really what it is. So I think that, well, you can think in different ways about the fourth industrial revolution. You could say, some people would say that it's an acceleration of the IT system and IT technology. Some other people, and this is what is suggested here, would say that it's a convergence between a variety of new technologies. So the IT, of course, and its interaction with the physical world, with what is called at times cyber-physical systems. So the fact that actual objects, but as well a factory, as well perhaps a city, can be connected to big data, to the internet, that's one thing. Then artificial intelligence and the gaps that it has made recently, and other things as well. Like biotechnologies, for instance, and a number of other things. And the idea is that all of these things are not going to work separately, but that they are going to be interconnected. This is the main thing I would say about the fourth industrial revolution, and that it will provide, or that it would provide, a disruption with the existing economy. I understand Robert is a bit more skeptical about this idea of disruption, but I mean, I think it's really interesting because we can have a discussion about this, and he will make points about this later. But I would say in the mainstream narrative about the fourth industrial revolution, you do have this idea that it will create a huge impact, a major impact. Okay, so this is it. You have the narrative, so fourth industrial revolution in this country, as you know, so with steam, started at the end of the 18th century. Second industrial revolution, electricity, but as well other things like aluminum and the car, probably. Third industrial revolution, automation. Okay. So a huge change in industrial processes, and then now, this cyber physical system I mentioned. I think an important point is that this fourth industrial revolution would not involve to change everything. It would involve, in particular, to connect things that already exist, like factories, like cities, for instance, to the internet. So it's not about changing everything. Like, you know, when the first Ford factory was created, I suppose, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was no Ford factory. It had to be built. Well, in this case, it's different because it would involve to use some of the things that already exist. All right? So I think in terms of transformation and economic opportunities, we're talking about something that is very, very important, that is really huge. Again, it's easier to predict the past than predict the future, but that said, this gives a good idea about the scope, about the dimension, about what we're talking. 4 billion people connected. So it would involve, of course, the global south, not only the north. In terms of business, 4 trillion. Many apps, embedded intelligence systems, and of course, the huge development of big data. And this, according to this, in the near future. Again, what I want to stress is that we are at the beginning of this process, okay? At this stage, these things still work pretty much separately. So for instance, there is no strong interconnection between artificial intelligence and the Internet of Everything. But at the end of the process, the idea is that this will be interconnected. Just to give you an example, so artificial intelligence, the idea would be that a number of interconnected factories, for instance, could be operated through artificial intelligence, okay, in a more efficient way than now by a number of managers, for instance. So if it really happens, then we're talking about something literally huge. Okay. I'm moving on to the question of preparation, which I suppose is very much related to adaptation implicitly in a lot of the literature, and either academic or more mainstream. One way to think about this is that, the sociology of adaptation in innovation studies. So I'm sure you've heard about this. So it categorizes people in relation to their relation to technology. So you would have early adopters, people with more money, I suppose, younger, taking more risk. Then you would have an early majority, then a late majority, then laggards. So it's a way to think, I guess the main point is that it's a way to think about how this is going to happen in the future. At this stage, probably we would be at the level of innovators and early adopters. An implicit question that this graph poses is the question of, again, time and disruption as opposed to continuous development, because this implies a kind of linear, thing that's okay. We will have early adopters, and then we'll have this and this, but it doesn't involve that, at point A, everything changes suddenly, for instance. So implicitly, this involves as well that there will be time to adapt, as well from the perspective of organizations, in addition to individuals. I guess it reflects pretty much what happened in the past. Quick point, difference between a disruptive innovation and a disruptive technology. Disruptive technology is something totally different. In social sciences, we would talk about incommensurability. So it means something totally different. So for instance, you would have a type printer, and then you have a word processor. You would walk, and then you would have a train. You would have a train, and then you would have a plane. Innovation is different. Disruptive innovation is different. It's something that technologically is not such a problem, but that makes a huge difference in terms of market, okay? From the organizational perspective. So this is my guess. Again, we can discuss it later during the questions and answers because I want this to be as interactive as possible. Probably you can say that Airbnb is, in a way, a disruptive innovator because you could already book, I suppose, a hotel through the internet. But now this is a huge change from a market perspective, but from technological perspective, it's not because, of course, other online platforms existed before this example. So I think it's interesting to think about this distinction because it's the question of the technology and how the technology is spread and then commercialized, I suppose. So you have a moment of invention and you have the moments of marketization, which are not necessarily connected. If we think about the internet was invented in reality very much by the American government, by public subsidies of the American government in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then, of course, it was commercialized, as we know from the 90s onward, by these huge and extremely successful companies that we know. But they didn't invent the internet, okay? It's not their R&D departments that invented the internet. So, okay, so these are recommendations from the World Economic Forum. So how to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. I think the first point is interesting. It's the idea that it needs to have meaning. It needs to be human-centered, okay? If you want to develop these technologies, you want people to use them, you want people to understand them. So it needs to be connected somehow to humans, of course. Point 2 and 3 are interesting and a contradiction, of course, because it's the idea that you need to make it sustainable, but on the other hand, so you need continuity, but on the other hand, you need some change, you need some disruption, because you need to adopt some of these technological innovations. So I suppose it's a contradiction, and it's successful organizations are the ones that will be able to deal creatively with this contradiction. Geoeconomic shifts, of course, this will have huge changes in terms of globalization, in terms of how the economy works at the global level. That's a huge topic in itself, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I will say a word later on China, but that's it. Okay. What type of revolution will this be? There are different ways to think about the future in relation to the fourth industrial revolution, if it really has, again, a disruptive aspect. First of all, utopia. Okay, so basically a significant improvements of life quality of everyone, because, so this is from the 60s, the Flintstones. So the idea is that dirty and boring jobs, basically, dirty and boring labor, will be performed by robots. That's the idea. So it's the society of the 60s, but with no problematic, well, dirty work, so to speak. I mean, this is a way to refer to basically non-reputable and low-skilled job in work sociology. It interestingly has a precedent in the history of ideas. In particular, you have text from Marx that mentioned this, like that technology at least would be able to replace non-meaningful labor, I suppose. So you have a history of this. This is not new. It's like embedded in our culture, so to speak. Then you have, of course, the other scenario, the opposite one, dystopia. So I want to say a few more words about this. This is very interesting. It's probably the most common in popular culture, I would say. So you have a number of films that literally depict a fourth industrial revolution and articulate it to a dystopic world with no democracy, with extreme inequalities. So you have a number of sci-fi films, of course. There is this one, and there is another which is called Never Let Me Go. So I didn't emphasize a lot the biological aspect, biotechnologies, emphasize more the internet aspect of things, because of course it's too short, but in Never Let Me Go, it's interesting. It's the question of clones, human clones. Okay, so it could be a part of this. So in this film, what you have is that you have some humans are cloned to harvest their organs, for instance. Okay, so it's a kind of dystopic world in which you essentially have slavery, moving back to slavery. Another thing that is much more common that you find in media discourse is the question, of course, of automation and mass unemployment. So the issue that this revolution, in particular, well, for blue-collar jobs, of course, but as well through artificial intelligence for white-collar jobs, this will involve mass unemployment. So you have this is really that exists in media discourse. Just let me give you another example about this, because it's very, very interesting. Recently, there are a number of legal scholars, so I'm thinking about specific legal scholar in my country, France. His name is Garapon, and he has written a book about this. And he's very, for instance, he's very worried by what artificial intelligence could do to lawyers and judges. So he's saying that some people could propose that algorithms could replace judges and lawyers, because allegedly then they would be better at judging, I suppose, all right? For instance, from the perspective of the lawyer, they would be better at predicting a potential verdict than a lawyer, and then from the perspective of the judge, they would be less inclined to be influenced, or to make mistakes. So he's saying this is, from an ethical perspective, he's saying this is a real problematic thing, because justice should be a human thing connected to ethics, so on and so forth. All right, let me move on to these issues. So, okay, so we had the utopia, then we had the dystopia. So now let's think about other scenarios. Transhumanism. So I guess some people are very critical about transhumanism, but you have as well a more positive way to think about it. So including with this guy, Carr. So the idea is that then technology and the fourth industrial revolution would allow humans to be more efficient and better, and to be more humane in a way. That technology is not something separate from humans, and that paradoxically dominates them, like in the dystopic thing, like you create these robots and then they dominate you. He says, no, the technology is something that makes us humane in the first place, and more technology at least has the potential to make us more humane, more ethical, so on and so forth. So, okay, so if we think about how this fourth industrial revolution might bring about, or at least has the potential to bring about, a better future, here are some ideas, perhaps. Basic income, and I'm not going to say too much now, because I'm going to speak about it later. This would be a response about automation and mass unemployment, at least a potential one. Then questions of democratization. Because of course, with the Internet of Everything and with artificial intelligence, what you have is the possibility to make much more accurate decisions, and as well to have much more information about what people actually want. So it would be a possibility, for instance, to increase empowerment, to be able to know in real time what people want. For instance, I don't know, at the level of politics or at the level of a city, you could have a smart city. You could ask people, okay, to vote about projects, to provide inputs, so kind of participatory democracy led by this fourth industrial revolution. This is just one idea. There are many others, but it's just so you can see, so you can visualize that you can as well have positive ways to think about this, and smart organizations, I suppose. as well from your perspective. So organizations that would be more efficient, smarter, more intelligent, better at responding to the environments, and perhaps providing better services to their customers. Few points about fourth technology and business in particular. So as I mentioned, smart organization. So the idea would be to be able to understand better, first of all, to understand better, so this would be the first one, to understand better the environments, to be smarter at understanding the environment and how it, and the fact that it's going to be transformed very quickly by this fourth industrial revolution. That's one thing. And as well, then to become a knowledge organization, I suppose, that is not only able to adapt to the environment, but as well to be more based on knowledge from all perspectives at the level of the organization, but as well in terms of innovation, and to be able to cope with this change, and how to transform proactively the organization so as to survive as well at some point. The issue of democratization again. So this is interesting. This is a quote from a Labour Party report, very recent. And clearly there is this idea that if this technological revolution is going to be positive, it has to be connected to new ways to think about ownership about it. So perhaps you might have cooperatives, perhaps public services would be relevant. Anyway, these questions are posed. And again, it's a response to the issue of the dystopic, as the potential dystopic aspect of the fourth industrial revolution. From the perspective of work, I suppose, this would have very big effects that could lead to the acceleration of things that already exist, like flexible careers, boundaryless careers. So the fact that people do not necessarily have to be in an organization to work in this organization, and that perhaps it might be more efficient working from home or on a network somewhere. So this potentially might change the way to think about work and organizations. As well, I think that there is the idea that, the genuine idea that, in particular with big data, in connection with artificial intelligence, this will allow to have much more information, but not only information, but actionable information, information that could be used to sort out specific problems. Okay? And this is quite interesting. A few points to conclude, really, and then we'll move on to questions. I think that, okay, so I tried to present some ideas about the fourth industrial revolution, about perhaps how to adapt to it, and about possible scenarios. What I would like to emphasize is that it's not, going back to the few points I made as an introduction, it's not something inevitable. You know, it's not something that is natural. It's something that we create. We as humans create technology, so we have some agency on it. Okay, so the future will be what we do about it, I suppose, and there are different scenarios that are possible. As well, what I would like to say is that it's as I said, it's not inevitable, and it's the beginning. It's the beginning. We are not seeing what Schwab is talking about at this stage. It's very likely it might come in the next few years, but at this stage it's very early. So we are seeing potential convergences. We're seeing many things, but it's very early. So there is a lot of scope for agency and how to shape it from a variety of ways, just to mention one example from the legal perspective in particular. Okay, at the national level, but as well at a more global level.